Welcome to a special edition of the Your Morning Coffee podcast. This week, I sit down with Michael Huppe. He's the president and CEO of SoundExchange. He's also an adjunct music law professor at Georgetown, published author, frequent contributor, lecturer, friend of the podcast, and he's also just a music freak like us. We sit down and we talk about the new music business, everything from generative AI to the American Music Fairness Act, and of course, all things SoundExchange. So sit back, relax, and listen to this conversation with Michael Huppe. Let it roll.
Stand by for transmission.
This is London calling.
Wake up! The revolution is at hand!
Your morning coffee is on the air. 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 On the air.
Standing by.
Your morning coffee, the weekly music news for the new music business. It's the highly curated, agitated, advocated, moderated, and liberated digital music information that you need to know. We are your digital music authority. And now from our studios in Hollywood, California, here's your hosts, Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart.
Michael, thank you so much for joining me again. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Jay. Always love being on your podcast and talking with you.
Yeah, this will be fun. So before we dive into it, how did you get into music? What were some of the first records or maybe your first live show? Do you remember?
I do remember. So the first records that I bought, I of course listened to them when I was very, very young. But in grade school, I think my first albums were, you ready for this? Steve Forbert, Jackrabbit Slim.
Wow.
And Billy Joel, Glass Houses. So those are, and my first concert was an all-day concert. I grew up in Delaware outside of Philly. So it was an all-day outdoor concert up in Philly. And it was Madness, Joan Jett, and the Police Synchronicity Tour. So
the best.
It's a respectable first concert, I think.
That is iconic. For those with no prior knowledge, let's go back and explain what is SoundExchange and what does SoundExchange do?
Sure. Well, SoundExchange does a lot of things. The core of what we do, we were basically created by the music industry to help collect and distribute many of the royalties from streaming radio, right? So non-interactive radio, kind of lean back radio, think Sirius XM, or iHeart Online, or certain services where you don't build playlists. It's just kind of like traditional radio. That's really the bulk of what we've done. We represent the entire music industry. Our board is made up of record labels and artists, and we were created to basically help make all of this part of the industry work a whole lot better. We started out paying just a little bit of money, and that's obviously exploded over time. Now we regularly pay out over $1 billion a year to artists and labels and studio producers when their recordings are used on these streaming services.
We included a short soundbite in the podcast this last week that you posted online. And the reason for that is it's surprising to me that people I talk to today are still not aware that performers receive no compensation when their song is played on the radio, terrestrial radio in the U.S. Let's talk about that for a second and tell us about the American Music Fairness Act, how it came about, and what the current status of it is.
Sure. And thank you for bringing that up. This is a critically important issue to the entire music industry, not just even the American music industry, because obviously there's music besides American music played on American radio. And what that basically, the situation in the U.S. now is that when terrestrial radio, so AM, FM radio, when they play recordings on their networks, they make $12 billion a year doing it. they pay exactly zero to the performer and the record label and the studio producer, everyone who helped bring that recording to life, everyone who created the thing that you're listening to. They don't pay anything for the right to use that. It is kind of unbelievable because we are the only Western industrialized world country where that's true. Every other major industrialized country in the world pays the recording artists. They pay songwriters as well, as they should. We pay songwriters here. They pay songwriters. Songwriters absolutely deserve to get paid. They're a critical part of the process.
Sure.
But in addition, the people that bring that song to life through a recording, and really the thing that draws the crowd with the radio for a radio station, they just deserve to be paid fairly. Let me give you a sense of what that means in terms of economics. It's a $12 billion industry.
Yeah.
And if we were to get this right, it would be hundreds of millions of dollars probably that the recording industry would receive from that for the use of those works that they don't receive right now. And on top of that, because we don't pay for recordings in this country, many times American artists overseas, when they get played on those foreign radio stations, also don't get paid. That's another, call it $300 million a year we would be bringing into this country from overseas use on radio. So
Right.
it's inexcusable, to be honest. You think about a $12 billion industry that's paying zero for its primary input. It's really, really inexcusable. So we have been at SoundExchange. We're part of a coalition called the Music First Coalition. We're an anchor member, and we have been fighting for many years to get this changed in the law. And by the way, it didn't even start with us. Frank Sinatra did this 50 years ago. There's a famous letter from Frank Sinatra that he sent around. There's a lot of artists along the way who support this. In fact, recently we just released a letter signed by more than 300 really big name artists that you would know the name of. Names like Aerosmith, Celine Dion, Gloria Estefan, James Taylor, Mariah Carey, Pink. It goes on and on and on. 300 artists who've banded together to say, all we're asking for is what's fair, right? All we're asking for is that us, and by the way, even lesser known artists who participate in radio, that they should just be paid fairly. So the American Music Fairness Act is the bill that's in Congress right now. It's bipartisan legislation. It's with each passing Congress, we're getting more and more momentum. We have some very strong supporters in Congress. So we hope one day to be able to pass this bill and allow performers to get paid.
Yeah, we're following it super closely, and thank you for your hard work on that. So one of the hottest topics today is generative AI, and you wrote a really great article that we covered. It was in Forbes, and the headline was AI in the Music Industry, Why AI is Not the New Napster. And you know as well as anyone, our industry has a long history of dealing with disruption. So how can we ensure that platforms like Suno and Udio and others secure the proper permissions and licenses to train on musical works?
Well, it's a great question. And, thanks for referencing that article. I do think AI is very different than Napster. I actually used to work at the Recording Industry Association, and I joined the month after they filed the Napster lawsuit. So I was there for a lot of the Napster experience. And, back then, I just think the Napster, the way it came to be and how not just the industry, but really our society handled it was very different than AI. With AI, for instance, Napster was, we sort of retreated to our corners and fought the battle. Whereas with AI, you see, yes, there are lawsuits out there, but you also see a lot of labels leaning forward, engaging with AI, recognizing that it's a tool.
Yep.
You see a lot of musicians embracing AI, recognizing that it can benefit all parts of the recording process. That wasn't as much the case back with Napster. I think a couple other things, Congress and policymakers are immediately engaged with AI. They recognize the threat, and even some AI companies themselves, some of the ones who've testified before Congress, realize and accept that they need guardrails. You never got that from Napster. Napster never came anywhere close to saying that. But another way that it's different, Jay, I think people using Napster back in the day maybe didn't really realize the aggregate impact of all of that use. To a lot of people, they were just downloading these files that were music that they liked. And I'm not so sure it was apparent to everybody the huge impact that could have on an industry. That's part of the reason why, by the way, that the industry started suing some of the users to help raise awareness. It was also because the courts were not giving any relief till the very end. So, they tried the legal process, but I don't think that's the case with AI. I think everyone who's using AI, everyone who's involved with it, even people who love it or are intrigued by it and see its great potential, recognize that this is a big seminal issue for not just the recording industry, but really all IP industries in our entire culture. I don't think that was present back in the Napster days with your average consumer. So those are some of the reasons I really do think it's different than back then, and which was why I'm certainly optimistic about hopefully being able to get through this.
Yeah, there some of these artists, you mentioned labels embracing it, Universal with Endel and so on, but some artists are embracing the technology too, like Grimes and Imogen Heap, who we just talked about, Randy Travis, Holly Herndon. Are those use cases helping to inform the conversation that it's not just the evils of illegal downloading, which hurt so many different people? There are some positives to this AI too.
Yeah, I think, I know artists, a lot of artists have actually, I'm blanking on the name of the service, but well-known artists have actually licensed their voice for people to do, sound-alikes. And the thing about AI that we need to always remember is it's another technology. It's, in the long history, like you said, of disruption in the music industry. But we just have to make sure when it's being used, we talk often about the 3 C's, credit, compensation, and making sure that they can use what they need to of people's IP, just license it. It's not really that complex. And then, and you see that happening, quite frankly. I know that there are AI companies that have licensed, news organizations or licensed, other types of photography resources. So the way that we ensure that the platforms, get the proper permission is, I guess it's got to be a carrot and a stick. It's always best to try to lean in first, like I said, approach some of these organizations, try to get them to license. And in the event they don't, go to court to enforce your rights. We believe the U.S. law is pretty clear that if you're going to scrape an entire copyrighted database to build a commercial product, you need permission. That is not fair use. Obviously, there are others out there who take a different view in court, but we think that they're, at the end of the day, that hopefully they will not win that, and people will recognize you just need to pay people for their intellectual property.
Yeah, I mean, it seems obvious, but it looks like some of these companies are looking to beg for forgiveness instead of asking for permission, and it's not going to work. But on the other side of it, I love some of the things that are happening. Brenda Lee putting out, Rocking Around the Christmas Tree in Spanish, done with AI. Randy Travis, who sadly suffered a stroke, putting out a couple of amazing songs with, trained on his voice. And it's absolutely stunning and beautiful. And I think there's so many upsides to this if we can wrap our arms around sort of the legal aspects of it and get people to respect intellectual property.
I totally agree. I mean, there are so many interesting use cases, people licensing a signature sound, right? Again, with permission, always with, credit and compensation. Or I talk about music resurrection, right? The Beatles, the Beatles dropped a track last year, ironically named Now and Then. I find the irony of that title in this context always amusing. But yeah, there can be a lot of really interesting things that to the entire entire recording process, as I said. When you go to some of these conferences, I was at South by Southwest last year, and I just was struck by how many panels were embracing the potential of AI. Now, that being said, we are founding members of the Human Artistry Campaign, which is a very important effort to make sure that the human part of creativity is not lost in all of this. We support the No Fakes Act, which is another bill in Congress to make sure to empower people to basically prevent AI companies from using their name and likeness, their voice, in a way that's done without permission. So we waxed poetic a lot about AI, but I just want to make sure there's got to be guardrails. We can't let AI steal the soul of our creative industry.
Yeah, 100%. We were reading an article that was in the podcast last week that Deezer had mentioned that 18% of what's being uploaded every day to Deezer is fully generated with AI. And I'm not saying that's good or bad, if the songs are great. But to your point, as long as the songwriters and the performers that this is trained off of, as long as they're compensated, you can't stand in the way of technology. I wanted to ask you about, are there misconceptions about digital royalties and rights management that you wish people understood?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, one thing that I think people may not get is it's not as easy as it looks, I guess, is a way to think about it. When you think about how to administer all of the royalties throughout the entire music space, it is a very complex, data-driven issue with an immense amount of usage data that comes in, an immense amount of ownership data that comes in, and it's a very difficult task to make that all happen seamlessly. We're very proud of how we do it at SoundExchange. I think we're one of the only entities. We pay out every month. Even though we're the biggest at what we do in the entire world, we pay out every month. 90% of our money is out the door within 45 days of receipt, and we do it all for one of the lowest administrative rates in the industry. So we're proud of what we've done, but it's a lot harder to get there than people realize, and it takes a lot of work behind the scenes in terms of data and delivery mechanisms. Another misconception or another thing that people don't think about is, obviously, streaming is global, right? We know that now. Unfortunately or fortunately, actually, I won't put a judgment to it, but every single territory, every single country has different rules and regulations, different copyright laws, different ways that they administer those laws, different rates. Sometimes the exact same conduct in one country will implicate 3 or 4 or 5 different rights, and it may only implicate 2 rights in a different country. So the patchwork of laws around the world make what we do a little bit tricky because, SoundExchange is a global entity. We do deals around the world with companies that do what we do, so that if you sign up with SoundExchange and you're a member of SoundExchange, we can give you not only your U.S. money, but we can collect for you around basically almost the entire globe. We have 75 plus agreements covering almost 90% of the globe by value. So we have to think about and know about all of these different territories and how they do things in their world. And it's more complex, I think, than people realize. So until we have, I guess it's a while till we have one global government system. So that would fix it, but that probably comes with a whole host of other problems.
Sure. I can't even imagine just dealing with the metadata across all of those rights and all those different territories.
Yeah.
What role do you think government policy and regulation should play in shaping the future of music rights management?
Well, I guess, there's a time and place for the government, and there's a time and place where they should leave it to business, right? So I don't think it's helpful for government to necessarily try to insert itself into business issues. But there are times where policy and regulation makes sense. So for instance, I just mentioned the No Fakes Act. Government sometimes needs to step in and make sure that creators are protected and that the rights of creators are protected. Or we talked about AMFA earlier. Obviously, I'm a big fan of government intervention if it means making sure that creators get paid by the $12 billion FM radio industry. So I think government has a role to help set fair rules for the game, right? Once the rules are fair, then, and once the playing field is level, then fine. Let the business in the market do what it does. But an example is, FM radio, not a $12 billion industry, doesn't pay for its primary input. All of its competitors do, right? Satellite radio pays, internet radio pays, cable TV radio pays, they all pay, but their competitor FM doesn't. I think government has a role to make sure that FM plays by the same rule as all those other digital streaming platforms. So like I said, there's a time and place for government to intervene. And obviously we like the government tools that help us enforce against people that are using content without permission or not paying what they should under the law. So like I said, there's a soft role in maybe creating guardrails or setting a level playing field, but that role should be limited, and government, too much regulation is not a good thing.
Yeah. How does SoundExchange balance the needs of majors versus indies, with its licensing and distribution models?
It's an interesting question, actually. We don't even really think that way. I know a lot of the industry does, but SoundExchange represents the entire industry. Our board, we have an 18-member board, and it's made up of major labels, indie labels, trade associations, unions. AFM and SAG-AFTRA are both on our board, artists, lawyers, and managers. We really represent the entire industry. So, everything that we do for a sound recording owner, we do for a sound recording owner. And maybe that's the biggest record label in the world who sits on our board, or maybe it's an up and coming label. Similarly, we do things to maximize value for content, whether you're Taylor Swift or an up and coming artist. So we really don't think in that terms, because we work for everyone and represent everyone. And, don't get me wrong, that can make my job interesting and challenging at times, trying to align all of those forces. But generally, people recognize that we're just trying to do what's best for the industry, whether you're an unbelievable blowout hit act or just starting in the business. Now, one thing we do is, if you're starting out, we do have a lot of education tools that we do try to inform people about what to look out for, what's happening in the industry, what it is that we do. So I guess to that extent, we probably maybe have to give a little more advice and a little more engagement on some of the people just starting out who because the music industry is a very complicated industry, as you know. It's not like many other industries.
Yeah, and it's complex by design, and the barrier to entry is so low today that you and I could record something on my iPad and get it up on, online right away.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense. How do you see the role of SoundExchange sort of evolving? Because it's such a rapidly changing music business. It's changed while we've been having this conversation. How do you see SoundExchange's role sort of evolving going forward?
Well, we've evolved even in the 20 years we've been in existence. We're not that old. We're a fairly young organization, which, by the way, is we recognize the benefit of that. We describe ourselves as digital natives. We were born into the digital world. We were purpose-built to do what we do in the digital space. We don't have the challenges of some of these institutions that have been around, and so long that they were structured around a business model that barely exists anymore, right? The business model now is radically different than it was even 30 years ago. So we have evolved even in that time to do a lot more than what we were initially created for. As I mentioned, we're doing things to help with the data flow and the data situation. We are working with standards bodies to help make sure that all entities speak the same language and systems try to, talk to one another with the same format. So we're constantly changing. Where could we be in 5 or 10 years? One thing we think about is if you think about what is it that SoundExchange does well, we are very experienced and I would say very good at doing data processing and royalty payments at scale, right? We have 4,000 services that pay us, 700,000 accounts who we represent, whether they're artists or labels or studio producers, and tens of billions of streams, a month. And we do all that pretty quickly and efficiently and figure out, the money comes in from the people that use the music, and then we pay it out to the people that make the music. If you think about that as one of our superpowers, it's not hard to imagine how that same skill set could be applied to AI at some point, right? AI is doing all of the same things at a much larger scale, obviously probably add a few zeros to those numbers. But fundamentally, it's that same type of process has to be figured out. AI is going to create immense wealth on the backs of creators, and there has to be a way that that wealth can be shared at an appropriate level with the people that form the foundation. So that's one area we could be in. Another thing that we're doing is trying to bring the efficiency that we have to other parts of the world. We just announced a deal with Music Nation, which is a collective in the United Arab Emirates that is just starting to get going. And we see, is there a role for us to play in emerging markets where we can help creators there also get paid efficiently, fairly, and quickly? Is there a role we can play to help make sure that the rates, we can get the rates up so that creators are paid what they're owed? So that's another area we're looking into in the future. How can we maybe help bring some of the skill set we've developed here in the U.S. to emerging markets, all to the benefit of the music industry?
So you're a writer, you're a public speaker, you're an advocate. Talk a little bit about your initiatives surrounding education, just getting out the information about what SoundExchange is, how you sign up, how you learn more. Just talk a little bit about the education part of what you do.
Sure. There's so many facets to it. I mean, you can never do too much education. In fact, part of what you mentioned, I'm a writer. Thank you. That's being generous. I think you see, we do have a casebook out on music law that we teach at Georgetown Law School with my co-professor there. Part of the reason I teach there is because I think it's important for up and coming lawyers in the industry to get a very balanced view of, how did the industry get here? It's not just an advanced copyright class, right? It's what's the history of the industry? How did we arrive at where we are and where is it going? But also to get them to think not just about the legal aspects, but the policy aspects and what do all these changes mean for different parts of the industry? So that's one way I really, try to get the word out. But we also at SoundExchange have, we are constantly going to conferences where we speak on panels or do keynotes or have interviews. We often set ourselves up in the artist lounges of these conferences, try to get the new and up, the new and emerging artists who may not know, not just about SoundExchange, but about everything about the industry, and talk to them one-on-one in ways that, that they can understand, so they can really maximize their likelihood of success. We also have a lot on our website. I encourage people to go check out our website. We have FAQ sections. We have a lot of video FAQs now. If people want to know how to register, how do you claim your repertoire, what happens when there's a conflict between you and, when two people say they own the same recording, that's the type of stuff we have to help work through. So there's a lot on our website to educate people, and we're starting to do regular webcasts. So there's a whole host of how we try to get the word out. But you know what, Jay? Podcasts like this are also helpful. I really appreciate you. I know you're a supporter and a fan of what we do, and I appreciate you helping us get the word out as well.
Yeah, anytime. It's surprising to me how many people I meet who simply just haven't been educated yet on SoundExchange or AMFA, no fakes, all of this. And so I think we all just need to shout it from the rooftops. Michael, before I let you go, you sound really optimistic. Every time I talk to you, I feel better about the state of the industry, in that someone's minding the store and sounding optimistic. Is that accurate?
Well, thanks, Jay. Yes, I do think it's accurate. I mean, look, there's a lot of challenges we've had. and do have as an industry, but we've always had challenges, and there's always disruption.
Yeah.
I actually think disruption is a positive word. I think disruption is a sign of sort of making things better and moving forward, and trying to recreate the way that things are done. And if you think about, yes, we have these challenges that we're working through in terms of AI or performer rights, record label rights, things like that. But think about where this industry was 50 years ago, and think of how different it is now.
Yeah.
The amount of music that is available at your fingertips on demand, on any platform, is just astounding.
Yeah.
I mean, and we've always managed to work through these things, right?
Yeah.
So, and it's not just companies like SoundExchange, although we're part of that solution, I hope. But there's a lot of folks out there working on solutions. So I am optimistic that the future is bright. And by the way, if you look at the marketplace, and if you look at people investing in royalty streams and things like that, I would say that a lot of the investment money out there shares that optimism. If you look at the multiples that are being thrown around, so I think the future is bright for the music industry. It may not look exactly the same in 10 or 15 years, and maybe there'll be some players who are not very big now who are really big then, or there may be uses that we haven't even thought of. So it'll look different, but I think it's going to be an interesting future and a good one. So I am optimistic.
I love that. Michael, keep up the great work. Thanks so much for taking the time out of your busy day. Always look forward to our conversations. Thanks so much.
Jay, I appreciate it. You have a great day, and keep going with an awesome podcast.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Your Morning Coffee, the weekly music news program for the new music business. Join Jay Gilbert and Mike Etchart next time for the digital music news you need to know.